Nobody would have thought that I would be the one. Rhyner, sports talk. Baseball, 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 baseball.
Oh, with the big mic. Oh, okay. All right, yeah. Okay, now I get it.
We got a lightning strike, boys. What happened over there, Grego? We had a little lightning strike right outside the window.
The Texas Rangers win the World Series.
All right. Here's a tip for all these Americano League teams.
Wait, you said tip?
Yeah, tip.
Okay.
With a P.
Keep jamming.
The ticket, colon, nothing but a big Gen X jerk-off sake.
This is a cool night or what?
Although somebody would hear that and go, bullshit.
I'm back, bitches.
Hello out there, and welcome to another episode of YDC. We are here for you once again today. It is episode number 187, the 12th of January, and we have the entire crew and then some on hand today. And today is going to require a little bit of an explanation from me. I have a book underway right now. Not only do I have a book underway right now, I just recently finished a book. Nice. And you know, people don't read books anymore. I sure don't. They tell me. So I think I've done something here. It just so happens that both of these books have to do with the same general topic, and they are both been written by the same guy. He is Bill Janovitz, and via the miracle of Riverside, he joins us today. Hi, Bill.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Where are you joining us from?
It's an undisclosed location, it's my basement here in Lexington, Massachusetts.
Lexington, Mass, huh?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Where it all started.
Well, what Bill does is something that interests me a great deal, because if I'm going to read a book, chances are it's going to have something to do with sports of some kind, most likely baseball, or it will be a rock bio. And Bill seems to troll the mind of the rock bio quite a bit. And one that I finished because it's about a group that I'm very interested in and don't know hardly anything about. They're gone now. And when I say gone, they are gone, because they are gone and they will not be coming back, at least not in the form that we all came to know them. But he wrote a book called Let the Stories Be Told, and it is the story of the Cars. Now, I was a big Cars fan, by the way, back in the day. It took me a while to get there because the Cars intersected what is known by some people who know me well as one of my dark periods, a period where I just sort of sign off of everything, don't pay attention to any music, don't pay attention to really much of anything. I've had a couple of those in my life. I fear that I may be about to embark on another, that I may have another one underway, but time will tell about that. But this was a hardcore dark period when I was not hearing hardly any music that I liked. And now I look back on it and I see that it was way, way more about me and not about the music itself. The music was just like it's always been. There's good music out there. There's not so good music out there. And it's up to you to tell the difference between the two. And that was where I was falling somewhat short. But the Cars came along at a time where I was really alienated by it all. Somehow, though, they broke through, and I managed some sort of connection with them. And I came to like them quite a bit. So, Bill, let me just start right there. What got you interested in the Cars?
Yeah. So I was 12 when that first debut album came out in 1978. And I talk about, I was the oldest kid in my family of 5. So I had no guidance. My parents were not exactly, and are still not exactly hipsters when it comes to music. But it turns out that a lot of stuff they liked was, in retrospect, quite good. But in terms of contemporary music, it was up to me, like almost like you're saying there, to sort of go out and find my own music. But music was finding me. And when you're 12, 13, 16, your mind is wide open, right? And I wasn't really like, oh, this is music from the past, this Bob Dylan record. I mean, I knew as I got a little older, I was like, okay, this stuff is older. This is, at that point, 10 years old or whatever. So, but all of a sudden the Cars appeared, and it was one of those first bands, especially that debut album. It came via the older brother of a friend of mine who was also 12, but the older brother was already in college, and he had an orange Camaro, so he was already the coolest guy I knew, but he would bring back these records. And one of them was the debut album, and we were like, what is this? It just says The Cars, I mean, it's like, is that the title? Is that the band? What is this? Is it a bunch of things? Who knows? We just put it on, and there's that, the model, Natalia Moldova, in that pose on the cover, that was already titillating. And we dropped the needle, and I kind of remember it fairly clearly. Good Times Roll starts, and as I say in the book, it doesn't sound quite like the Good Times Roll of old time, like Let the Good Times Roll. It sounded like this was sort of like more of a malevolent Good Times Roll. These were going to be at the expense of somebody else, and yes. I was hooked, and I was like, it just appeared like this is now music made for me, for us, for our generation. It's old, it's new. I was 12. I was trying to figure this all out, but it just appealed to me just on a complete ear candy, tunes, lyrics, the delivery, everything just grabbed me, and I was all in.
When the Cars came out, I was breaking into the radio game at an FM music station in Dallas, and I was part of the programming operation, so I kind of had a little bit of a look as to what people who were making those decisions was thinking. And at that time, there were quite a few new wave acts, so-called new wave acts, if you will, that were starting to be foisted upon us, and record guys would come around saying, hey, play this record. And, some of them we did, some of them we didn't. There was a wide range of thought amongst all the people up there about what would work for our audience and what might be a little bit too fringy for them. Now, at that time, did you think of the Cars as new wave, or what made them, to you, in your view, distinctive from everybody else?
Yeah, well, I grew up in New York, Long Island, New York, a town called Huntington. And so we got the New York media, the radio, radio and TV, of course, so the city. So the reason I bring that up is because, the year before had been Sid and Nancy, around that same year was the whole Sid and Nancy thing in New York City. And it was like tabloid, and it was plastered across the local news and things like that. So I had that sort of shock of what that all was. I didn't quite understand all these distinctions, I don't think. But, they were playing things informed by punk, and some of the original punks, Patti Smith was one of the original punks, and she was getting a lot of pretty good solid airplay on like WPLJ or WNEW in New York, and Elvis Costello. I was starting to hear this stuff, but I don't know which stuff came first, but I do remember the Cars being one of the first records, and I did think of them as new wave. I don't know if that term was really being used yet, but I don't know. I don't think Devo had been, I kind of get into the timeline, a little bit of it in the book, but Devo was on SNL, famously doing their extremely creative reinterpretation of the Stones' Satisfaction. And I was such a Stones fan already that it blew my mind. And so all this stuff was like, okay, this is the future, right? Like music's going to be made by robots, and it kind of has now. It's kind of come to pass now. Now we have AI making music, but I mean, we thought like Kraftwerk and Devo, there'd be these sort of robots on stage. Anyway, it was all novel and new and fresh and exciting, and it was, like I said, Talking Heads as well. These are like bands that were very important to me even then, because their first record came out in '77, and Psycho Killer was already like this big. You can write this. This is this is a song that can be played on the radio, and it was just a really exciting time to be coming of age.
Did you think of the Cars as new wave per se at that time, or how did you categorize them? Because we at the radio station had them mixed in with just regular garden variety classic rock. We weren't a new wave station or anything like that, but some of it did cross over.
Yeah, and that's what the Cars were, right? It's like somebody in the book says when they first heard the Cars, they thought that Roxy Music finally broke in America, and they struck upon some sort of formula. And of course, it wasn't Roxy Music, but they did take a lot of what Roxy Music did, and others, Eno later, and Bowie, and Velvet Underground or whatever. Everybody's informed by that stuff in this era. So I don't think at 12 I was making such sort of like distinctions in a kind of intellectual way. It just sounded new and fresh to me.
Yeah.
I think, within that year or two, I was certainly aware of that term. And I remember, Damn the Torpedoes came out, and, Tom Petty was being marketed as new wave. Dwight Twilley Band was being marketed as new wave. It was, but it was just power pop, Cheap Trick to some extent was, these were like the bands that brought the power to the power pop, and sort of started mixing in some synths and whatever else. And then all of a sudden it's about haircuts and outfits, but it's still, not to use Billy Joel's quote, but it's still rock and roll, right? It's when you listen to it now, you go, wow, I mean, yeah, okay, Devo was pretty angular. Certainly Kraftwerk was doing something new, but all that stuff has been long mixed into everything and sort of synthesized into all the music that sort of we love through the 90s and on.
Yeah. Back then, when I would discover a new band, I would listen to their stuff and try to determine whether I liked it or not, until finally there would be one song that would push me over the edge. And I would either say, man, this sucks, or man, this is really great, one or the other. And with the Cars, that song, which made me say, man, this is really great, was Moving in Stereo. Did you have a song like that for you that kind of really sucked you in?
I think I was sucked in from the needle drop on Good Times Roll. And then, as they discussed, as Roy Thomas Baker, the producer of those first 4 Car albums, talks about, like, it was almost like counterintuitive. They sequenced the record, not completely counterintuitive. It's not like they went with Moving in Stereo as the first and all mixed up. It's like that; those are perfect album enders. But they did take those first 4 singles and put them in sort of reverse order of what they thought the strongest. Like, oh, you like that one? We'll wait for this one. Oh, you like those 2? Here's a third. To this day, they jokingly call it their greatest hits album. The one song, though, that Gun to Head is my favorite Cars song, I would have to say, is The Dangerous Type, because it's got those sort of noir archetypes that Rick loved to use, those sort of cliches, the dangerous type, she's a femme fatale kind of thing. But it also just builds an intensity to this, like, another album closer. It's like, oh my, it just keeps vamping out, and it's like, it's almost like gets more intense as it goes out. So, and it's catchy as hell. So, like all Cars songs.
One of the things about the Cars, and I know you play music, as do I, and one of the things about the Cars that I really liked and really drew me in, the more that I looked at them, the more that I listened to them, was they all seemed to be really, really good players. Was that your take on them too?
Yeah, well, I was just learning guitar for the first time that year, 12, 13. I think I was 12 when I got my first guitar. So, you start to pick out things almost immediately, and your ear just gets better and better as the years go by. So as a guitar player, I don't think I certainly wasn't the first one to think, oh man, Elliot Easton is an underrated guitar player. Like, I didn't know that back then, but I was sort of amazed by the guitar work. I wasn't like, the same year Van Halen comes out, and, it took me a while to appreciate Van Halen. It just seemed so over the top to me for what my taste was. I think I was into more of this. Like, I was a huge Jimmy Page and Zeppelin fan, a huge Stones fan. So those interweaving parts and rather than just sort of this bombastic soloing, which Elliot Easton, it turns out, was quite capable of, as you can hear from time to time, he just lets out a little bit of it, though. He was such a tasteful player. But yeah, I mean, just rock solid drumming from David Robinson, great singing, both from Rick and Ben. Ben with the more sort of traditionally beautiful, round-sounding, effortless crooner type voice, and Rick with this more angular. And it's funny because one of the great themes in talking about this, the band and the book, is like how many people didn't know there were two vocalists. And it's funny because they are, once you hear them, they're quite distinctive, almost like, when people listen to the Beatles, they first couldn't discern, oh, that was John Lennon singing that, or Paul, but then you hear it and you're like, oh, how could I not hear it, right? For the most part, people are like that. So they had these great vocalists, and certainly not last but certainly not least was Greg Hawkes doing these amazing counter melodies and hooks. And as somebody said, he's out in an outer orbit somewhere around the song with his synthesizers and keys and adding all this texture. And I mean, he more than anything sort of defines the band as a new wave band. Like, this is something, these are new sounds, new textures.
Yeah. All right. Is it Ocasek or Ocasek?
Well, I think both are acceptable, or at least I'd like to think so, because I say both. But given that his name was Ocasek, and I think that's how you would have pronounced the Czech name, and he dropped the T, I think it's, and I've heard him say it on the radio in an interview, saying Ocasek. But he also, in a press kit at some point, gave a pronunciation that's the opposite. He said Ocasek, as given the phonetic pronunciation written out. So I think it's Ocasek. Most people say Ocasek, though.
I've gone back and forth both ways. At first, it was Ocasek for me because that's what it looked like. But then people in the know, more so than me, started telling me that it was Ocasek. So, all right, okay, you say so, then it's Ocasek. Do you have any feel for what their scene was like in Boston before they got the record deal and started doing albums and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, I go into great depth, maybe too much for some people, about the Boston scene leading up to it, and like many places. For the early 70s, I think music in Boston got a little, and I'm talking about the clubs and the decision makers, maybe got a little, not so much the radio, but got a little conservative because it had its, it had this hype of the late 60s that was a marketing hype from a record company called the Bosstown Sound, which was basically non-existent. They were trying to put a few sort of, psychedelic bands into this
I remember
thing.
that.
And A&R labels basically gave up on Boston, which is kind of cool because it allowed Boston to become its own thing. The 70s bands, we think of the big Boston bands as being Boston and Aerosmith and to some extent Jay Giles' band, but Jay Giles' band didn't have a huge hit until the 80s with Centerfold and that kind of freeze frame. But they were like so well respected and they filled the local halls here quite well. But starting around the mid 70s, early 70s, you had people like even Peter Wolf from Jay Giles' band as a DJ on one of the most groundbreaking stations in America, which was WBCN. And you had Maxanne Sartori come in, who is almost, she, not single-handedly, but she, you could say single-handedly broke not only Aerosmith, but the Cars, Billy Squier, who she actually was dating at some point. I mean, she kind of very much was instrumental in breaking Queen in America. Springsteen, she was playing these people on the radio because she had the complete free reign to choose what she played. And she was playing the Cars demo version before they even had a record deal of Just What I Needed. So she was a huge force. So around the mid 70s, we got the Ratskeller, which is called affectionately known as the Rat here in Boston, which was which was here through the 90s, just a basement club in Kenmore Square around the corner from Fenway Park. And it was one of the first clubs that not only sort of tolerated, but actually encouraged original music. And people were starting to come out to see original music before these bands made it bigger. So you had the Police come through. You had you had U2 come through, but I don't think they came through. Well, I know they didn't come through the Rat first. They came through the Paradise, which was sort of the next tier up of clubs. So, yeah, we had a vibrant club scene. Of course, shouldn't go without saying, Boston has always been a huge college town, no matter what the Spinal Tap thought in the first Spinal Tap. So that constant regeneration of young people has always been good for supporting live music here in Boston. Never mind Berklee College of Music, which churns out musicians such as Greg Hawkes and Elliot Easton.
Yeah. And, as the scene unfolded for the band and they got bigger and bigger and the spotlight turned really in the music scene overall, the spotlight seemed to turn more towards singers than not so much players as it once was. And that can change pretty radically the whole dynamic of a band. And Rick, in the book, seemed to embrace that a little bit. But oddly enough, it was Ben who sang a number of their hits, and many of the bigger hits that they're remembered for today. Yet, as things played out, it seemed like Ben just kind of drifted off, and he was just not much of a part of things at all. That surprised me to find that out.
Yeah, well, partially it was by design. I mean, not his design, but Rick's and Elliot Roberts, their manager, who had a similar effect with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. If you've read Mike Campbell's great book that came out last year, there's a lot of parallels. Yeah, a lot of parallels. I mean, with Tom Petty, it was always Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Even when he was in Mudcrutch, he was sort of putting together these sort of journeyman guys from around Gainesville, and he was the one. But there are a lot of parallels, as I say. Rick Ocasek wrote all the songs in the Cars. Any songs that he didn't write 100%, he co-wrote with Greg Hawkes, and those are only like on basically like a handful of songs. You can count them on one or two hands. Moving in Stereo being one of the more notable ones, with a co-write with Greg. Ben didn't write anything, but Ben executed certain of Rick's songs in a way that Rick could never put across, and Rick knew that. And these guys had been working together as a duo since the late 60s, meeting in Ohio and coming to Boston together and going through 3, 4, 5 iterations before you get to the Cars, with different guys finally coming in and with this magical combo in 77. They put it together in 77, and by 78 they've got this humongous debut album. But as you say, time goes on, and Rick, I think, marginalized all of the guys in the Cars, and he was aided and abetted by Elliot Roberts, who was only really great at dealing with one person. I mean, most managers will tell you it's way easier to deal with one person than 4 or 5. And, I mean, that's just like any team dynamic is like that. You need a leader, but it went beyond just, I'm going to talk to you and you disperse this and you make a decision as a team. It was like, I make all the calls, I make all the decisions. And, as you see the records, the number of songs that Ben sings is like, it's like half on the first record, pretty much half on the second record. And it becomes sort of fewer and fewer. Some of them are still very much key songs, such as Drive on Heartbeat City. But, but Ben started to want to stick up for himself a bit more. And Rick was having trouble writing especially after Heartbeat City. I mean, he was on quite a roll there for 5 records. But it was after that he was pretty much depleted. So they have this huge, gigantic record, the most chart success especially on the singles charts and videos and things like that with Heartbeat City, with Magic and things like that. And you might think, of course, huge hits. But then their follow-up record after that, their sixth record, I should say, was just a flop, and it was made up of songs that they had rejected from all the other albums. But he was not open to anybody else writing except for co-writes with Greg. And even then, he was like, as Paulina, his widow, as Rick's widow says, Paulina Portskova says, even then she was basically she said Rick was basically thinking that he was just throwing Greg a bone here and there to keep him as his musical director, essentially.
Is that the way it really was? Would Greg get in there and work up the songs with the other guys before Rick came in, or was Rick there for the whole process, or how did it work?
Yeah, I mean, you're a player as well, so you've probably been through bands. It's like, how do you work, right? Like, what is writing? What is arranging? And I mean, the legal definition, and I think a lot of people will just agree beyond the legal definition, is that the guy that puts pen to paper, brings in the melody and the chord changes is the songwriter. If nobody's involved in that part of it, then they're arranging, and you don't necessarily get royalties for arranging, right? And you certainly get the royalties for writing as the band learned more and more as they went. And I make the case in the book that some of these parts, like, look, Elliot Easton composed these solos. These were not like improv like a lot of players do in the studio or in rehearsals. I'm going to come up with a part and just here's where I solo in a pentatonic minor scale, whatever, improv. No, he wrote these things to such an extent that he hummed them first a lot of the times, and then he would he would play the guitar to the melody that he hummed. Sometimes he would do a harmony to that and jettison the melody and use the harmony. So these are compositions. And if he had sang them on the record instead of played them, they would certainly be considered writing, right? So I sort of make the case as a guy in a band that there should have been a little bit more of an listen, who is it for me to say? I'm just making a guy with an opinion. But it's like, same with Petty and the Heartbreakers. It's like, look, these guys are really instrumental. I think the Cars more so, in sort of making the sound of Rick's songs, because Petty could go off and have amazing solo records, and you're like, oh, is this a Heartbreaker? It's Wildflowers. No, that's a Petty record. But like, Rick never had any great success doing solo records without the Cars.
Yeah, it's easy for me to equate the two of them when you look at it like that, because I mean, for me, the thing that's going to push a song one way or the other for me is if it's got good parts written around it. Mm-hmm. And Petty had that. The Cars had that. So give me those things and I'm hooked by both,
Yeah, I mean, he wrote the message, he wrote this, and the most important thing in pop music is a melody and a singer. But you've got all these other hooks that come in as the song. These songs were so brilliantly arranged as a band that it's like they come out fully formed because they had all been sort of around, They knew what made a great pop song, but it was definitely this combo of guys, this combination, but also this like just knowing intuitively, okay, no, we don't bring in the synth hook until here. Oh, now there's another thing. It just keeps hitting you with new hooks until you've got the outro chorus that, Best Friend's Girl being a perfect example. That doesn't even come in until the end. So Used to Be Mine or whatever. It's just these repeats. And those are all instrumental as far as I'm concerned, no pun intended, in creating a great pop song. And like you said, what's going to make it stick out on the radio next to all these other pop songs?
Yeah. How did Elliot Roberts enter the picture, if we can get back to him a little bit, because you spend a lot of time talking about his role in things in the book, and he was obviously a big influence on the way things rolled out.
Yeah, I mean, they had a guy named Fred Lewis as their manager, who had been like a Warner's Electro publicist, and he had actually been a sidekick of Peter Wolf's on BCN. He worked in a record store before that. Then he was road managing Jay Giles' band, helping a little bit more in the management kind of stuff, and he wanted a band that he could manage. He saw his colleagues from Paul Ahern and Charlie, whose name escapes me, who had huge success breaking Boston, the band, and he wanted to do something similar, of course. And Ben Orr and Rick's wives worked at WIA at various points, and they would pass around tapes of whatever the latest iteration of Ben and what Rick were doing. And finally, the Cars come around. So they had Fred for their first 2 records, but they felt like he wasn't growing with them. They grew exponentially fast, but he was barely staffing. He had nobody that could answer the phone. So they started looking around for professional management. And they interviewed 3. They interviewed Irving Azoff, they interviewed Shep Gordon, and they interviewed Elliot Roberts. And they were just so taken by Elliot Roberts, his pothead persona, this laid-back California dude. Russ Never Sleeps was spray painted behind him in his office by his client Neil Young. He had Joni Mitchell. He had Dylan, I think, at that point. But, they had signed Devo at Lookout Management as well. So they just hit it off as a band. Everybody loved them until they felt like they were being rubbed out.
Yeah. As is so often the case, guys like that, when they get involved, it just completely makes things totally divisive. And it sounds like like you say, he was Rick's guy and didn't have just a whole lot of interest in the rest of the guys. They must have felt pretty alienated by all that.
Yeah, I mean, and you hear different voices in the band to different degrees. I mean, I think Greg, like a lot of people that were screwed over by Elliot Roberts, I talk about Steve Berkowitz, who was the road manager for the Cars and also ran Synchro Sound, their studio. He got screwed out, and to listen to his take on it, he got screwed out of a huge amount of what he was supposed to get paid as a bonus for a certain big tour. But he's like, at the end of the day, I love the guy. He was a lovable rogue, With the Cars himself, he looked around. He said, well, which guy's the leader? Which guy's the songwriter? Who's got the publishing? Who's going to have the most longevity here? It's going to be this guy. And he stayed with Rick well past the Cars into the 90s when Rick started producing other bands. But yeah, David Roberts is very bitter about it and speaks very bluntly about it in the book. Elliot Easton, maybe to a slightly lesser degree, but really felt hurt by it. I mean, he was definitely more hurt by Rick's betrayal than anything else. What he felt was Rick's betrayal, more like his minimization of what he brought to the table. Greg was more like he understood it. Greg certainly doesn't seem like Greg seems like the least. He seems like the most secure guy, I should say, in a lot of ways, but just very diplomatic. He watches what he says. I don't think he takes things as personally. And at least after all this reflection, I didn't know him during the day, but he's a little bit more go along to get along, as Ben was, I think, until Ben wasn't anymore. Until Ben, I think Ben got some voices in his ears telling him, look, dude, you're a big part of this band. You should definitely be getting, look at this guy. He's got how many houses? And you've got, one nice, modest, but nice house. It's you guys should all be doing better.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like the money thing and the end game for those guys was just way, way out of whack there at the end.
Yeah, it's. Look, they all did well, and they all just signed, I think, a deal recently with, for certain of their rights that paid them off quite well. So they did well in life, and you see this argument in the Petty book as well with Mike Campbell recounting conversations he had with Stan Lynch, going, look, yeah, we could take a stand and get 100% or a greater percentage of nothing, or a small amount, or we can get a small amount of quite a big amount, and we're going to be. And I think it was Elliot Roberts told him, you guys are all going to be millionaires. And I think that is the case in the Cars, but the gulf of inequity grew and grew and grew to a certain point, especially because their biggest way of making a living was to be on the road. Those tours were hugely successful, even though they were not keeping overhead low. They could have been even greater if they had kind of done it more econo, but they did first class everything. And Rick did not want to tour, sort of period, He did it begrudgingly, certainly as the years went on, and especially as MTV came out, and you don't necessarily need to go hit the Midwest, because or as many towns in the Midwest, because the MTV is now playing our videos, and you don't need to go out and tell everybody who you are. So it made them a little less reliant on touring, and therefore the revenue was much lower.
Did you think they were a good live band?
I never saw them, but all accounts were that they were not. I mean, it's quite uniform that they weren't. I mean, by the time I was old enough to go see them, let's say 15 is when I first started to go to see, sort of bigger halls. That was already they were already had a reputation of not being, I had to pick and choose which concerts I was going to go to with my meager paper boy allowance and pay. So, yeah, I never got to see them. But, yeah, I mean, I think when I watched live clips of them that are sort of close up, like especially from their first couple of records, like you see them in Germany and you see them in France and in England, and then you see them on Fridays, and they were quite good. I mean, they sound amazing. But they played everything sort of like the record, and they didn't really give much, if anything, to the crowd. And this was by design, specifically by Rick's design. It was going to be like, we're not going to play the Hello Cleveland game. We're not going to, come into every town and say, hey, how you doing? We love you. And here's another song. Basically, he didn't want to say anything. It was this icy facade. They stood still, except for when Elliot would come out every once in a while and take a solo at the lip of the stage and recede. But if you watch them more close up, there's a tape of them, a recording in Houston in I think it's 83 or 84. 84 it must be. It's quite good. They started to learn about, okay, well, we need to at least construct big, elaborate sets and light shows to at least draw people's attention, more like a Wizard of Oz. Don't pay attention to the little men on the stage kind of thing. So they learned to sort of how to project at least that to the back of the room. But when you get in close, you see them kind of winking at the crowd. And like I said, they sound amazing. I never expected... I mean, there was this expectation in the late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s, that things had to be spectacular. It had been after the Stones, after Zeppelin, after Pink Floyd, light shows, lasers, smoke, people talking, engaging with the crowd to try to bring in these arenas down to a more of a human scale, or at least go big or go home. The Cars didn't play that game, and I think it was, I think 99% unanimous of anybody I talked to, not in the book or otherwise, that they were just not a good live band from that perspective. They were not compelling. They were the most boring act most people had seen.
I saw them live twice myself, and the first time I saw them, I was just absolutely blown away, just because I couldn't believe I was actually seeing the Cars that I'd come to love and everything.
Where did you see them?
At Reunion Arena here in Dallas, which is at that time was the big room around here. And a couple of years later, they came around again, and I was all worked up to go and everything. And I came away from that pretty disappointed. I mean, not that they were bad or anything like that, but by that time they had just reached the over it all stage, that I think happens to a lot of bands.
Yeah, the over it all is a good way of articulating it. And I think people felt insulted by it. It's like, look, I paid this much money. You guys got to you don't have to act like goofballs and be something you're not, but you can at least engage a little bit and make it seem like you're happy to be playing rock and roll. But yeah, it's funny. I think there was a lot of darkness in the band. I know there was. I mean, we talk about it, but it was kind of like. It was sort of Rick down was the mood, was the leader down. I mean, he dictated the whole vibe.
Do you think we're ever going to see Greg Hawkes and David Robinson and Elliot Easton doing anything else, if not together, then separately or with other endeavors? I mean, what are those guys up to these days?
Yeah, they all do stuff separately. I mean, David as a drummer, it's harder for drummers because you got to have a band around you. So he's been recording. So let me back up a little bit. Elliot has been playing through the years with all kinds of different bands. He played with Creedence Clearwater Revisited, that had its own controversy. Then he was in the controversial New Cars with Greg and Todd Rundgren and Todd's guys. That was also controversial and not very well received. But then he played in a band called The Empty Hearts. He plays on people's records all through those years, and he still plays. He shows up for benefit. Like, that's how I met him. I was playing music at a benefit concert in L.A. where it was a Kinks tribute. It was a benefit for autism called the Wild Honey. It's been going on for 25, 30 years. It's called Wild Honey Benefits Shows, the Wild Honey Foundation, and there's Elliot Easton playing guitar with me. It was like, holy, and that's sort of what started this whole book. It's like, hey, I think there should be a Cars book, Elliot. You know, he and I hit it off talking about music, and he had one of my Stones books already. So he plays. Greg plays in this great band called Eddie Japan. Eddie Japan is this separate, they're their own band, but they started having Greg come in and he started coming in and contributing in the studio, and that grew into more of a, how about come up and play a Car song or two with us? And then that grew into, let's do a whole show of Car songs, and we'll sing them. Greg will play with us, and then Greg tells these stories in between. And I got to tell you, I went to go see it when I was writing this book. They play a lot around the Northeast, and I just had this smile plastered. I had like cramps on my face from smiling through the whole thing. It was so much fun. It's not like a Cars tribute act. It's like this great band, like flawlessly executing these songs with Greg sort of telling anecdotes in between some of the songs. So yeah, and the three of them together have been working on tracks that were unreleased that Rick had in his vaults, some of which he had been working on until he died, some of which were songs that even go back to the early Cars or a little bit before the early Cars. And they've been sort of finishing these off, and, you know, I don't want to use the free as a bird analogy, but it's sort of the closest thing, you know, sort of that Beatles, let's put this, and I heard them before Elliot put his parts on out in LA, and I've heard them after that, and I could just hear these songs growing from like sort of Rick demos into full-blown Car songs, and they're going to put those out, I hope, in the next year or so. But, you know, it's not a big organization right now. And there's three guys, they're all in their 70s. It's like, you know, they're all at different points in their family lives or whatever. So it's trying to get them all on the same page is, I think, a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. Do you think that they knew, that the other guys knew, that that Elliot and Greg and David knew that the end was near for their friends before they passed away?
Well, they had heard that Ben was sick, and they knew it was probably, I think they knew it was terminal. It was pancreatic cancer. But you'll see there's this video interview, their last interview of the five of them together in 2000. The occasion was this Rhino release of some of their music, and they put together this video interview with Brett Milano, a journalist here in Boston. But they did it down in Atlanta, which is where Ben was living, so he wouldn't have to travel. But they were not prepared for exactly how ravaged he would look from the illness, and they wish the video, I think, was not available. That's how bad they feel about it. Like, you could see their different reactions, and I talk about their different reactions in the book and how they all sort of choose to deal with it in this moment. So I think it just devastated all of them. Paulina talks about Rick coming back from that, and then Ben dying within months, and just being haunted by it all. You know, it was a similar effect for all of them. But when Rick died, it was similar. I don't think they knew he was sick. You know, he kept everything secret. He kept things secret from Paulina, which she mentions in her book and my book, in my interviews. So I don't think she even knew the extent. You know, in fact, she was away thinking, okay, they made this, they had this operation. She gets back for the operation, and he dies within, I don't know how long after she was home, but pretty quickly. They had been separated. They were on their way to getting divorced. So yeah, I don't think they knew the end was that near.
What about Greg and David and Elliot today? Are things cool between the three of them?
Yeah, I mean, the Cars were not like five buddies that got together, It was I think the closest relationship was Rick and Ben early on. But even that was like this sort of, I say brotherhood in the way, in sort of a literal sense. Like, of course, they weren't literal brothers, but I mean, when I think people hear brotherhood, they think it's all positive. But I mean, anybody that has siblings knows the ups and downs of various sibling dynamics you might have with different individuals in your family, and it's fraught. And communication between men to this day can be a tough challenge, So I think back then it was way more even sort of macho, and you sort of hide your feelings. You don't talk about that kind of stuff. So a lot of the stuff wasn't talked about. So that relationship fell apart. But now to answer your question, yeah, I mean, I think Greg, I've been around Greg and David at least 3 or 4 or 5 times. I mean, I had an interview with them together a couple of times. And I've played gigs with them a couple of times, and yeah, I think they're friendly. I think their families and wives would go out to dinner. They both stayed in the Boston area, whereas Elliot went to New York first, and then when the Cars broke up, he moved out to Los Angeles. So the proximity is not great, and they still have their business agreements and disagreements, I think. So I think dynamics in any kind of team, family, whatever you want to say, any kind of personal dynamics, they get set and they're hard to change. People are who they are, and they relate to other people in that way, and it's hard to break out of those patterns. And I think they have to deal with all that stuff to this day. And it's just funny to think of like guys that formed this band in their 20s. They still have to, 20s and 30s. They still have to sort of deal with each other in a business perspective, and now they're old fellas,
Yeah. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this today, because as fate would have it, once I finished Let the Stories Be Told, I picked up on the Leon Russell book.
All right.
He's got a Leon Russell book. And let me get through with that, and we got to have you back on here to talk about that.
I would love to. I've had a great time chatting with you, and I would love to talk about Leon with you anytime.
All right. That is Bill Janovitz joining us today. The book is called Let the Stories Be Told. It is the story of the Cars. And if you are a Cars fan, this is something. I know they're gone. I know they're not coming back. I know this is all a long time ago, but if you're a fan of theirs, there's stuff here that you need to find out. You need to read this book. It's a good one. All right, thanks to everybody for watching today. And thanks to all of you out there. Thank you, Shoopy. Thank you, Becca. Thank you, Ashley. And Bree. Thank you as well. If you like what we're doing, as always, get us out there on your social media. Put us out there on your Twitter. Like us, share us, do all that stuff that you have to do with us. I'm talking about stuff I don't know anything about, but you do. So do it for us, and we will keep going here at Little YDC. Thanks for watching. Bye.
All right. I'm going to go take my pants off.
Your Dark Companion is a Stolen Water Media presentation.